Hello, my name is Simon Good. I'm a professional mediator, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about 5 different techniques that you can use to reset after a difficult conversation. Obviously, for myself, I'm often coaching clients that I work with to develop these tools to use during a mediation session. In a break, for example, how they can reset and find balance again before we go back to discuss options. And I mean, that's really important for them to manage all of the stress that comes along with the situation. But what I want is to be dealing with people who are at the highest level of capacity possible. Obviously, during a mediation, a lot of the times that's pretty stressful, and the rational bit of our brain might start to shut down and we go into fight or flight mode. So I want them to be able to generate options and develop a sense of awareness and responsibility for dealing with the discussion and coming up with a plan to improve communication if that's the topic of the mediation. But this is also really helpful in other contexts as well. In leadership, if you've just had a performance management conversation with a staff member, you'll be worked up. And you don't want to carry all of that stress and the buildup of adrenaline and cortisol into the next conversation that you have. It will mean that you're quicker to make decisions, you're more reactive, more tunnel visions, more short sighted. And that's obviously not going to be your ideal self going into the next task that you need to focus on as a leader. In our family, I've seen so many instances of situations where people yell at their kids and they get really worked up and angry. I've told you 6 times to have a shower, for goodness sakes. And then you go back and try to finish cooking and you're sort of chopping up the vegetables in a very worked up state. And what do you know? You might end up cutting your finger. Unfortunately, it's not cutting our own finger. A lot of the time, we end up hurting someone else. We're snappy and irritable at our partner after they've had a really difficult day. Or it might be that we have a negative buildup of stress. So then we're lying in bed at night and we're replaying all of these difficult conversations that we've been through the day. So finding the techniques that work for you to reset, to restore balance, homeostasis, process what needs to be processed, and leave these past events in the past where they belong, that's really helpful both in terms of looking after yourself and supporting other people around you as well. So let's have a look at the first option here. It's a type of deep breathing protocol. This is a particularly deep breathing technique that I often suggest that people try before a mediation, before they go in, for example, to just make sure that they've got a clear head and that they're in the right frame of mind. But it's also really helpful after a conflict, during a break, or after a mediation session finishes, after a difficult meeting, after a difficult phone call. When we breathe deeply, it's more effective if we use our nose. It's more effective at slowing down our heart rate and fully emptying our lungs. What it does is that it sends a signal to our body, slows down our heart rate, helps our body to physically relax, which then helps our mind to feel more calm and composed. It usually takes, I'd say, sort of up 2 minutes. It wouldn't often be much longer than that. Doing some deep breathing, you'll find that your heart rate slows down a bit. You feel a little bit more relaxed. It's like the opposite of having 6 cups of coffee before you go into a difficult conversation. And then you're in that really ramped up state. Like, what do you mean somebody forgot to order that? Oh, for goodness sakes. Doesn't anyone here know what the hell they're doing? I'll just do it myself. What the bloody hell's the point? We go into the red zone, that really attack reactive way of, whose fault is this? I've already told you that. This is the 3rd time I've had to remind you. Or black zone. Well, what's the point anyway? The toys out of the cot having a tantrum type of moment. So finding a way to reset using something like these deep breathing protocols, really important. So here are the steps. First, you want to inhale and then pause and then finish your inhale, complete the inhale. So we breathe in, pause a little bit, continue breathing in sort of as far as we can, and then breathe out. If you want to count, you might like to count up to 5 or 6, something like that. And then pause. And the next step is just to notice the point where the air reverses the direction. I find this to be an incredibly useful way of anchoring our attention in the present by actively controlling what you're focused on. And this point where the air reverses direction, there's just something about it. Like, it's really drilling down to that granular level of detail of what we're experiencing. It's internal as well as external. It's subconscious as well as conscious. There's just something about that particular point that works really well when we focus there. The next step is that we breathe out, keep our breath slow and steady, go for a little bit longer than would be automatic. When we fully empty our lungs, it's the opposite of that fight or flight response. And one of the natural techniques that we can use to slow our breathing down is to breathe out a little bit longer than we normally would. So breathe in, count to 5 or whatever you want to do, and then breathe out, and then you might count to 6 or count to 7 or see if you can get to 8. And one of the tools that I sometimes use, even during a difficult conversation, is I just keep breathing out slowly and really empty my lungs. And interestingly, I'm often surprised at just how much air is in there and how long I can keep blowing out for. But when I pause and just notice what goes on in my body when my lungs are really empty, there's almost like this electrical charge that I become aware of. Like it's like jittering when you're a holding up weights or something like that, and your arms start to get really tense and sore, the point where they might fail soon. This same sort of physical sensation tends to be there when we feel like we're not getting enough oxygen, for example. So we just pause and then let the breath come back in naturally. That'll then sort of just over time slow your breathing down as you continue to extend the length of your exhale. Pause and just pay attention to what's going on physically. Do you notice any type of physical shaking or tension or release or tightness? Just how does that affect you physically? What goes on in your body as you continue to slow down your breathing? What that does is create sort of this really positive reciprocal spiral that develops where you notice yourself calming down. It then helps you to rationally feel more calm. And then, of course, your body and brain work together. So your body then relaxes even more. You notice that even more. And it starts to become this, I don't know, just really nice reciprocal process that helps you to continue that momentum of relaxing and relaxing and relaxing. So I would say try and do it for at least a minute or 2 minutes, something like that. Just concentrate on this. There's nothing else deliberate that you need to do. You don't need to home or say any mantra or anything like that. It's just this, it's a technique. So focus on the steps that are involved, and what you'll notice is that you might start to feel relaxed a lot quicker potentially than you might otherwise expect. The next technique that we can use is reflective practice. The deep breathing sort of focuses on our body and helps us to relax physically. Reflective practice is a particular set of steps that I often talk about with clients that I work with, or new mediators or new managers who I'm coaching, as a way to help them to develop and improve. And the idea is that we dedicate time to mentally process something that's just happened. So in a mediation, I often block out 30 minutes in my diary after the session to go for a walk or whatever I need to do to reset and process it all, because I don't want to experience that build up of vicarious trauma, like me replaying the stories that they told me, for example, that night as I'm trying to sleep or driving home. And so what it means is that I need to find a way to process it. They sort of talk about the benefits of this being the highest when it's done contemporaneously. So at the same time, or as soon after the event as possible. So like I do it before I go and have something to eat for a mediation, for example. So the first step is just a vent. It's just a dump. You just write or talk. Some people talk to themselves when they're driving. Some people put a voice recorder on and record themselves talking through an experience. Just typing or handwriting in a notebook works really well because it slows us down. We can't sort of write using a pen as quickly as we can type for a lot of us. And there's no structure needed. The first step is just what happened, what was going through my head at the time, what am I thinking now, what am I worried about might happen, what did I do to prepare, what was unexpected. There's no right and wrong. You might think about what you did as well as what you thought, as well as what you were feeling. You might talk about the past and the present and the future, maybe, but it doesn't really matter. The first step is just externalizing. And then what we want to do is to step back one step. It's like hop in the helicopter and go up a little bit and look down on all of that externalizing that you just did and notice the themes add in context, add in detail. The idea here is that we're going back at the pretty fresh memory and processing it, checking its accuracy, adding more detail. What it might be is a very black and white story. It's my fault that that happened. I didn't manage that conversation with my staff member well. I'm worried that I'm going to get in trouble for this. It's this black and white story, and what happens is that we pause and just reflect on the story itself. It's this meta processing layer. And what it does is that we see that it's not actually black and white. There's all sorts of other things that are connected to it and all sorts of shades of grey. And actually, it's much bigger and more complicated than we thought originally, because our subconscious likes to keep things simple. It's a threat or it's not. It's delicious or it's not. It's good for us or it's not. I'll just gamble one more time, one more time, one more time. It's this little decision without the context of, well, how much money's in the bank account? And when do I think that this behavior might be becoming an addiction or whatever? So when we notice the themes, we notice the context. Like, God, that was a really difficult conversation for us all to be in, wasn't it? We were in a meeting with a lot of people in the room and everyone wanted to have a chance to have their say. So no wonder I was feeling worked up and tense. And no wonder I didn't feel like I expressed myself very well, because that was a really high pressure environment. Just understanding your behavior in connection to the context that it was in means that you're not carrying the same level of responsibility. It's not your fault. You're not solely responsible for this. Notice the physical effects, what's happening in your body when you go through this sort of experience of reflecting. Sometimes the memory becomes associated with a feeling and sometimes even associated with a physical sensation. It's sort of called encoding, or what might be called implicit memory. And this means that when we ruminate, we remember a situation that we were in yesterday, we almost re-experience it. And sometimes that comes along with a physical sensation as well. Your hands will clench, or you'll shake, or a particular part of your body will feel tight, or you'll all of a sudden stand up and walk into the next room because you've got this, I just need to move, I need to do something, I shouldn't be sitting still right now. And what do you know, before you know it, you've walked into the kitchen and you're sitting there thinking, why the heck did I come in here? What was I looking for? And there was nothing. It was almost reliving this past experience. It's very bizarre when you realize how much of your day you spend in this dreamlike type of state where your unconscious is just automatically walking you from room to room or whatever. So when we remember this experience that happened yesterday or this morning or whatever it was just then, what we want to do is to notice the physical effects that come along with them. That inherently starts to weaken the automatic association, and what we can do then is to replace it with a different association. We can rewire that memory by physically relaxing ourselves now while we remember this recent experience that we had. What that means is that it carries a new association of physical relaxation, and therefore that buildup of stress doesn't affect us as negatively or as profoundly. Then I ask myself some questions. What is still sitting there? Like, what am I still thinking about? What's the focus? Is there a particular bit of the story that I can't stop thinking about? I can remember a lot of mediations I did with family violence and little images, like a lady telling me that she looked under her jacket and she could see that there was bruises and the person's nails had broken the skin. These particular little phrases that sit with us and really affect us. And that might give us a clue then about what we need to do to look after ourselves, or what it was about that particular image that stuck with us, or what we need to do now, or how we wish that we could have supported that person. Like, for me, that was a real sign of my own impotence, really, to help, given the fact that I'm a mediator, but I'm not the police, I'm not the person that's going to be there checking if the kids are safe after this session that I'm facilitating. So when I realized that, it's like, oh, there's this really high level of a sense of responsibility with a low level of autonomy or ability to influence a situation. This is something that puts us really at risk of burnout. And the clue for that for me is this question of what's still sitting there in my mind. It's this image, and why? Because of this connection, a high sense of responsibility, low level of autonomy. So I might need to do something then to process this, like go and see a clinical supervisor and talk through options, or spend a few minutes tomorrow just looking back over my notes and checking I didn't miss something and there's something else I should be doing right now, like a referral to a different agency or something. So what's still sitting there, and then how come? What do you think that's about? What do you need to do for the situation? Like if you've just met a staff member, what do you need to do now? Do you need to send them an email? Do you need to refer it to HR? Do you need to let your manager know? Like for the issue, what needs to happen? And then the next question is, and what about for you? What do you need to do to look after yourself right now? Do you need something to eat? Do you need a break? Do you need just some simple tasks to focus on this afternoon to clear your head, because right now you're feeling like everything's just a bit overwhelming? What do you need? So what do you need to do for them, for the situation, for the issue? And what do you need to do for you in terms of self-care? And then, given all of that, what's the next helpful step that you can take? Often finishing with that is a really nice way to drive us towards a helpful, productive action. Then, we start to feel like we've achieved something. It triggers the healthy release of dopamine, and we're not craving it from a chocolate bar or a beer or a glass of wine or something like that after we've had a stressful day and not done any of this. And then we've got this build up of cortisol and stress that we walk in and dump on our poor wife or kid or whatever, if I'm thinking about my own situations when I don't manage this very well. The third technique that we could use is mindfulness. And again, you just have to follow the steps. There's no magic beyond this. You can't fail if you get distracted and your mind wanders and focuses on something else. That's part of it. And there's a clue, like that's happening because your brain is stressed. So expecting that that's not going to happen is just not realistic. So mindfulness is where we try to focus our attention on the present, and I'll talk in a moment about how we do that. And we're wrestling with our mind that wants to go wandering. It wants to play us images that are disturbing and stressful. It wants to display us images of the beer in the fridge that's waiting for us or something like that. It just wants to feel better. And if we can understand that we're trying to calm down a bit of our brain that just wants to feel better because it's so worked up and stressed, then we can compassionately almost treat it like a child. There, it's okay. I know you're worried right now. There's nothing to worry about. I'm sitting in my room. My boss isn't here to yell at me now. So I'm remembering my boss yelling at me, but right now I'm safe. I'm in my room. My boss isn't there. It's almost like a way that we calm down a child. This is what our subconscious part of our brain needs as well, because its focus has been on short-term survival. If we've been in really stressful situations all day, you've just come from a difficult conflict, then you're in fight or flight mode. And your subconscious part of your brain doesn't know the difference between a job interview and someone following you back that might want to attack you when you're walking back to your car at night. And so what it does is it activates these same survival mechanisms. And one of the things that mindfulness does is that it focuses our attention on the present and stops us from getting worried about the past and the future, which you might notice is the part that your subconscious bit of your brain wants to focus on when it's in fight or flight mode. Remember that dumb thing that you said yesterday? Remember this threat that your boss gave you? Remember this awkward meeting that you've got tomorrow? Remember this horrible, celebration that they're going to have for you and make you stand up the front, and how embarrassing that's going to be? This is what your brain wants to remind you of. So you need to take back control of your focus. So the first step is sit, close your eyes, and take a few deep breaths. You could sort of use the technique I talked about in technique 1, or just take a few deep breaths and just notice what's going on. And then the idea is that what we're going to do is to engage our senses first. So notice what you can see, what you can hear, what you can smell, what you can taste. If you want to, you can close your eyes. That tends to amplify our ability to focus on the other senses, like what can you hear? What else can you hear? What can you feel? What else can you feel? Wiggle your toes and feel the feeling of your socks. What's the air temperature in the room? Is there any breeze or is it still? This information is always there coming in through our senses, but our brain decides what to focus on based on what's important. So we can take control of this consciously, to some extent at least. In terms of feeling, you can focus on what you can feel externally, like in your skin, like rub your finger on the desk and feel the grain of wood, or the texture of the clipboard that you might be holding, but also internally. This is what you might call the sixth sense. I know Dan Siegel's referred to it like that. Is there a part of your brain that's tense or tight? How does your stomach feel? Is it empty or full? Can you feel digestion gurgling away there? Can you feel your heart beating in your chest? Is there any physical sensation of that? What about your posture? Where is your tongue in your mouth? What else can you feel inside your mouth? Again, all of these things, we have access to these senses, but until someone says something like, "What's your tongue doing?" you probably don't focus on it. What we're doing here is just anchoring our attention in the present. There's nothing else magical or complex beyond that. This inherently will help us to start to feel more calm. Notice, this is the seventh sense, on what images pop into your mind. What does your mind start to think about? What does your mind pay attention to? Am I remembering this event that happened yesterday? Okay. How come? Because that was stressful. It's activated the fight or flight response. Like, we know why. So we can just compassionately say, okay, well, that makes sense why my brain's noticing that. What's my tongue doing? Wiggle my toes and feel my socks in my shoes. It's as simple as that. It's just gently redirecting your focus back to the present. And when your attention wanders, just gently refocusing. Try not to beat yourself up about it. It's tempting to think that you failed or something's gone wrong. This is part of it. We're training ourselves to deal with this stressful event that happened and bring ourselves back to the present and calm down. It's a muscle. It's like the first time you lift a weight. Oh, I'm not any stronger. Well, what's the point of that? Weightlifting doesn't work for me. I've tried mindfulness before. All that happened was all these thoughts kept coming back into my head. Yeah, that's the point. It's like if there's nothing heavy to lift, then you're not going to get any stronger. And if there's no thoughts that keep coming back, then you probably don't need mindfulness. You've probably already a Zen master, and you should be the one teaching the rest of us. The fourth technique is just thinking about physically what do you need. Taking control of your body. So you could think about things like adopting a more powerful posture. I really like the TED Talk by Amy Cuddy. You sort of clench your fists and then hold your arms up like this with your chin up, doing this for 2 minutes or doing some sort of powerful pose like this. It activates the release of testosterone, makes us feel more confident, stops or slows the release of cortisol, the stress hormone that we have, and I think also triggers the release of the sort of the hormones that flush out our stress response, so to speak. In short, it helps us to feel more calm and confident, more in control, and to perform better at challenging tasks. We should think about ways to release tension. Like, I know some people roll up a wet cloth and then they throw it at the ground as hard as they can. Maybe let it out a yell like, ah! Swearing is an option I know a lot of people find really helpful. For F's sake or whatever. Just finding a way to externalize it. Is there something safe that you can throw? Is there what are those rooms called where you go in and smash everything that's in there? The anger room. And this is the idea. It's just letting it out. We're recognizing that for what it is, though. It's a release of some of this built up energy that's sitting there. This physical adrenaline, we're in fight or flight mode. Our body has been literally getting us ready to fight or flight. So if we don't find a way to do something with that build-up of energy, it can erupt in other ways, like yelling all of a sudden at our kid when we would ideally want to be more calm, even if we decide to be firm and assertive. Something like yoga is really helpful, I think, because what it does is we have to balance our focus on our breath and trying to stay calm and keeping that steady while doing really difficult physical things. I've really enjoyed starting yoga myself this last 12 months. I've never thought I could be the kind of person that did yoga. I was too embarrassed to go to a class. I just do it myself at home watching YouTube. But man, it has been so incredibly helpful for me at just developing that capacity to go through a stressful event while staying calm. Because every day, I'm planking or something and I'm just trying to stay calm while physically I'm like, oh, this sucks. I can't keep doing it. I can't keep doing it. I can't keep doing it. And also staying calm and breathing at the same time. I haven't personally found anything that's anywhere near as helpful as that. So yoga for me has literally been a godsend, and my wife, other people around have noticed the change in me, I think, and they've all started doing it too. So, I mean, my wife was doing it before me, so I can't claim that I was the original, what would it be, OY, original yogi. Stretch. A lot of people find stretching really helpful, or maybe bunch and tighten up your muscles and then slowly let them relax and just notice what that physically feels like. Sometimes you just need food or something healthy or water. Maybe that's it. Or it's just 5 minutes in the air conditioning if you've been in the sun having this difficult meeting and you've just been yelling at the neighbor or whatever it is. Using cold really works well. So ice packs on the side of the neck, putting ice here and here kind of thing. Jumping into a cold pool, having a cold shower, going out in the cold if it's cold outside just for a moment. There's this sort of physical shock that comes over us, especially with cold. And what it does is it inherently slows down our heart rate. We tend to feel in a different mindset after that as well. Or maybe it's just something like having a sleep. So this is technique 4. I suppose this is really a group of options. It's just, what do you need physically? Leave the emotions aside, leave the thinking aside. Just, what does your body need right now? And then the final step are the different options for exercise. I think it is just one of the most useful tools that we have for resetting after a difficult conversation. For me, there's sort of two different areas. There's the quick, softer stuff, like going for a walk around the block. That's really helpful. Just let out a little bit of that energy. When we walk, we look from left to right, which engages the right and left hemispheres of our brain. It's this, sort of left-right type of focus and motion, and it directs our attention in that same way, which helps us to integrate a recent experience, like a difficult conversation or conflict that we've just been on. So a quick walk, if that's an option, really helps. But on the other side of things, like the real build up, the high intensity training, going for a sprint for 30 seconds and then resting for 30 seconds, going for a sprint for 30 seconds and then resting for 30 seconds, doing cardio and getting our heart rate up and putting ourselves in that physical type of difficult state, or lifting weights and seeing it as we start to improve, like pushing ourselves beyond what we thought that we could do. All of these things are really helpful, both in the short term for releasing that stress and build-up that's happened there from conflict, but it also increases our capacity to deal with conflict because we're in a very similar physical state to fight or flight. Heart rate's increased, blood pressure's increased, shortness of breath, etc., and trying to stay calm or practicing calming ourselves back down again. So there's a longer-term therapeutic benefit as well as a shorter-term just release and reset benefit as well. I've also really been looking into lately more and more, it's sometimes called movement. Ido Portal is one of the people I've seen on YouTube talking about this concept. The idea is that we sort of just become more aware of our bodies physically and deliberately moving throughout the day. It's a little bit hard to articulate, but I suppose if you wanted to apply it in an office setting or at home after a conflict with your family, what you would do is just to deliberately focus on how you move. For example, let's say you go and make a cup of coffee. After conflict or after a difficult conversation, there's often a build-up of stress, so you're moving very abruptly and quickly and in this rush type of way. And so what we would do is to notice that first, but then to try to move like somebody would move who's more like how we would like to be. How would somebody move if they really were feeling confident right now? How would I move if I were more calm? How would I move if I wasn't worried about this thing that was coming up tomorrow? How would I move if this wasn't ruffling my feathers and I wasn't feeling flustered and overwhelmed? It's almost like fake it until you make it in some bizarre way, that if we act in particular ways, what it does is it activates that neural circuitry that's associated with feeling and acting in that same way. It's sort of like the idea of how a placebo works. It physically changes ourselves if we think about something. And so the reverse association also seems to be true, that moving in particular ways affects us in terms of our brain. So if you're making a coffee, just slow down and move calmly and move in a more composed type of way. Move like you're somebody who loves yourself and respects yourself and cares about yourself, and notice what difference that makes in terms of how you're feeling, particularly after a difficult conversation or after conflict. What I've noticed is that if I can just even be still and stop moving until I've decided what I want to be doing, and then doing it in a way that's a little bit more graceful instead of clumping up the whole way, what it's doing is it's the opposite of this negative spiral that we go down when we're feeling angry or we're feeling overwhelmed and worried. And it creates a positive spiral that helps us to sort of show up when I'm talking to my kid or my staff or talking to that important client. And if I've been acting and sort of going through the process of preparing in a calm and more composed way, when I walk into the room for the next meeting, what it does is it often means that I'm able to execute that. It's sort of this practice, meditation practice, yoga practice, movement practice. What we're doing is practicing for real life. So after a meeting, just focus on your movement. How are you moving physically? Like, what are you doing? What motions, what gestures, etc. And then how would you move more of if you were like how you want to be? And then try it. Just experiment. So I hope that that's been helpful for you, thinking about those 5 different options that we have for resetting after a difficult conversation. You might like to think about what are your key takeaways, what are the main things for you to apply, and then come up with a plan. When will you do this? What would that look like? What do you need to do now to increase the chance that you'll remember to do it? Like maybe it's a reminder post-it note under your computer monitor, or a little note on the fridge to remind you to do some deep breathing after a conflict. And then notice what difference it makes. A lot of people are surprised about just their capacity to improve at things like conflict and communication when they take it seriously. They've just never thought of it. It hasn't been something they're aware of. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, how I breathe after a meeting affects, my capacity in the next meeting. So I'll spend a minute just resetting. Gosh, that can make just such a massive difference then in terms of your own ability to develop positive relationships and deal with conflict and look after yourself as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got a topic that you'd like me to discuss in a future video, please let me know. Otherwise, if you'd be willing to press like or subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. For a small channel like that, it makes a massive difference. Bye for now.